Ahoy! Recently, Ajax made a long post about the god design process in the context of power creep in response to somebody else that I thought was very worth talking about. You may know by now that I really like these in-depth replies from the devs, which are kind of similar to the blog posts they used to do, only that they do it in replies to others now. So this was in response to a post called "Why does every new god have to have power creep through the roof?" I can't say the full username of the poster on YouTube, so we're just gonna call them Train. So Train wrote the following. I'm reluctant to play SMITE the first couple weeks when a new god comes out. Hi-Rez has an obsession with making new characters having each of their abilities do 8 different things. In the past year we've had Heimdall, Yemoja, Tsukuyomi, Cthulhu and now Danzaburou. Notice how that poster kind of left out Baba Yaga and Mulan here, for I guess obvious reasons. Continuing with the post. It's not fun to play against them. After a year, Heimdall is the only one that has been nerfed enough to still be good, but not OP as hell. The rest still dominate games if someone decent is playing them. We have gods like Hunbats that have an ability that just does a cone of damage, nothing else. If Hunbats was released today, his second ability would have knock-up immunity, gain 50% damage mitigation during the animation, a protection shred, and for every guard you hit in the cone it will reduce the cooldown on his third ability by 1 second. Now obviously there are quite a few overstatements in this post, but we don't have to go into that in detail. Let's go straight for Ajax's response here. Ajax wrote, I've seen a lot of comments on new guards in general, so this response is going to go outside the scope of just OP's comment, but it seems like a fine time to share some more accurate and up-to-date information. First, OP's topic here. On the concept of power creep. New gods are designed to bring new features, new themes, and new experiences to the game. We are not intentionally overpowering new gods, we are not intentionally adding elements specifically for power. Abilities have multiple components to add to the god's theming, or to put new gameplay twists on abilities. I think this part is very understandable from the perspective that yes, obviously they could release gods with very simple abilities, but that would quickly bring up the question, why release gods that have abilities that other gods already have? If we have another god with a Ra beam type of ability, then people would say, well, that's just copied from Ra. So they have to do something different with the abilities in order for people not to be frustrated with the abilities being too boring. Continuing with the post. On balance versus design. Balance does not directly relate to the number of things an ability does. It's easy to have an ability that does a lot of different things and still be weak or feel weak. So comparing these two concepts directly is a bit of a misdirect in itself. Often new gods win rates go down substantially through some reasonable number nerfs, no components need to be removed. Before we go on here, I'd actually like to add an example. One of the gods that was released this year that had a lot of things going on in her abilities was Baba Yaga. She has tons of things in every different ability, but she was still released in a rather underpowered state overall. What Ajax doesn't mention here, which I think is more of a problem, is that the more complex an ability is, the harder it is to balance the god. So, for example, Tsukuyomi, while he's still too strong, is someone who got nerfed in relatively straightforward ways for the most part, because his abilities are straightforward in how they work at least. You just tweak some numbers and it'll reduce his impact overall. Cthulhu, on the other hand, has much more impactful and complex abilities that go from team buffs and heals to pure damage to something else in between that make it a lot harder to really precisely balance him in my eyes, and I think this is something that is harder on newer gods. On our goals for new gods. Contrary to a top comment in this thread, we actually have sufficient data to prove that our players prefer more complex gods, with more interactions and higher skill caps. We have been mostly designing to that regard for the last 2 years. This has created some interesting perception versus reality problems, like Persephone or Yemoja having some of the lowest win rates in the game while still being regarded as overpowered. These gods have low win rates because most players cannot play them well. Personal note for me here, I actually noticed this problem a lot when making my tier lists. That's why I made the new SPL tier, since there are gods that are simply too complex to play, or too complex to play well for most players, unless they're very experienced with that particular god. On things always changing and intentional diversity. Now I'm sure plenty of people will read my previous statement and point out one specific easy god to invalidate the statement, so let's respond to that now. We aim for a lot of diversity between gods each year. Gameplay, class, pantheon, visual and theme. And difficulty diversity. So not every god is intentionally expert to learn. Some are just hard, or even medium or easy. We intentionally alternate through these aspects. Things change, goals change, our design process has changed. Things we aimed to do 2 years ago aren't accurate to our goals now. On gods being launched intentionally overpowered. This is generally false and not our goal at all. Generally, we would prefer gods to be released as feeling balanced, meaning their launch few weeks win rate should be in the middle of the pack of gods. So out of 110 plus gods, that would be rank 40 to 60-ish in win rate. This is the ideal launch. This is what we aim for. It's also very hard to do. This is not a SMITE specific challenge. If you follow any similar game, you undoubtedly see similar new champ OP or new champ trash comments. Gods are designed from their theme and their gameplay. These goals bring about the core components of each ability. Balance is constantly considered alongside theme and gameplay, and tweaks are made constantly for months of development. I shared the launch data here, and then it links to a post from Ajax a while ago. I already discussed that one in detail. You can check that out for yourself if you want to. I'll try and link it right here if you want to see more about Danzaburou's launch data specifically. 2 of our gods were underpowered, Mulan, one extremely so on launch, Baba Yaga. One was clearly overpowered, Tsukuyomi, and the other 2 were relatively close to a target, although still overpowered, Cthulhu and Danzaburou. Now this particular aspect I find a bit questionable considering Danzaburou's current performance, but we also have to see how he will do in ranked, so we have it more split up by player level. Now, it's not our goal for new gods to be OP. Let's look at what objectively happens to new gods. New gods that are OP tend to get a lot of play. We have no data to show that people actually quit the game because of this, and they tend to keep a reputation of being OP for a long time, keeping their popularity or ban rate high, even when the win rate or win percentage drops to 50% or below that, which is for example very true for Cthulhu. His win rate at the moment isn't that high most of the time, but he's still super popular, banned a lot, considered very strong. New gods that are weak tend to drop off in popularity very fast, still bring people back to the game to check them out, and tend to keep the reputation of being weak for a long time, even when buffed well above 50% win rate. We aim for balanced, and we're generally okay with launches being a little too strong or too weak. There are pros and cons to both. We don't try to engineer either of the above situations. This is just what tends to happen when people passionately discuss video games on the internet. On balance and response to launches. Every god this year has been adjusted within 2 weeks of launch. That is our first balance release and the soonest we can reasonably make changes. Tsukuyomi was the strongest god in years and the only one we ever considered a balance hotfix for, but he was still adjusted on bonus balance 14 days later. We take player feedback seriously and make considerable adjustments as early as possible. One thing that commonly comes up is PTS data. And I want to make it clear that PTS data is extremely unreliable and weak. It generally has very few games. All of them are new god mirrors. For the Danza patch, literally 100% of Conquest games were Danza mirrors, and the data we saw there did not match live, and neither have previous gods. The gods almost always get stronger from PTS to day 1 live to day 14 live, and each of them tend to grow at different rates. Having the first few days of actual live data is so much more helpful, and we quickly balance in response to that. Danza will be the only god who won't be adjusted this quickly due to launching during the holidays. His win percentage has climbed into nerf territory, and we'll be nerfing him in 8.1 with the rest of the major changes. When it comes to this part, there's a few things that I wanted to point out. Obviously, gods will perform better on day 1 than they do on PTS, since on day 1 people will have already seen some videos, some gameplay, potentially some guides, and other bits of information that just tell them how to play the god a little bit better. Not everyone will, many players will not, but there is a group of players that will understand the god better from day 1 than the first day that people playing them on PTS. PTS games are also extremely unbalanced because you have players with all types of skill level being meshed into games together, And you also have different pings, because many people will just queue on NA or sometimes EU just to get a game together, because it's hard to get enough players for a game. So that makes the data a lot more unreliable than anything else. But I do think there can still be indicators in there that give a general direction of where a guard's going. And Hi-Rez used to nerf off of PTS, and I'm not quite sure why they completely stopped doing that. I think if Danzaburou got a minor nerf coming off of PTS, I sent a lot of feedback in that regard myself, that wouldn't have ruined the guard. I think that would have just balanced him a little bit more, because right now his win rate is going up, and Ajax said he is now in nerf territory, and I said from day one that this guy will need some nerfs. I expected relatively high amounts of nerfs. Maybe in hindsight they might not be quite as high as I predicted, but I didn't expect Hi-Rez to do many nerfs at once anyways. I expected if I tell them 5 things that could be nerfed, they're gonna nerf 1 off of PTS. So I think there is still more room to handle things differently post PTS before the actual launch, but other than that, I agree with the general idea here. And then Ajax posted about the development side and community. We are always listening to our players, and we try to reply as much as possible. I've been on vacation and spending a lot of time with the family, so it's been harder to catch everything that's happening. I still check our SMITE often, as well as Twitter, watching streams and playing the game. Even on vacation we do all of this. They probably shouldn't, to be honest. And then Ajax talks a little bit about how he needs to go back to his family and stuff, but he actually replied to someone else afterwards as well, so he didn't actually stop there. So Chaos, who you may be familiar with from the guard renders that I use in my videos, posted some further questions here that Ajax also responded to. I'm going to summarize his questions here and then go into Ajax answers. The first thing that Chaos said is that it seems like sometimes the theming takes priority over balance. The guard he used as an example here was Tsukuyomi. Ajax responded, "Theme is very important, and you asked more on that, so we will come back to that soon." Tsukuyomi has more components in order to make his passive design feel complete. He has the light and the dark basic attack, each arranged, each with different shapes and a different effect. The dark bonus attack also has a bonus effect, as does the light one you're referring to. You could argue that neither needed this extra bonus attack, being ranged and a different shape is enough, but we felt like the attacks should have something additional and unique to diversify them. This was in reference to the true damage. Chaos then asked if Persephone's and Yemoja's win rates wouldn't be skewed because they are banned a lot in ranked matches. Ajax responded, the old win rates being skewed discussion. The answer is no. Persephone and Yemoja still get thousands of matches, hundreds of thousands in non-ranked. This is a lie Reddit tells itself to make them feel better when their opinions have no basis in stats. Persephone and Yemoja have proportionally just as many mains as any other god, and their normal versus ranked conquest stats track well into each other. I really should do some deeper digging to help show hard data to disprove this, but the god's skill ceiling, these two gods are hard to play optimally, is overwhelmingly more of a factor on their stats than "I promise I'm good with this god, I just don't get to play it enough." Chaos then talks about the theme versus balance aspect again, stating that the balance should always be the main priority and everything else should come second. Ajax responds, "Theme is the most important part of a god's entire kit. This is what makes the gameplay exist. Sure, you can come up with an ability that is just pure mechanics and no visuals, and then find a way to fit it with the god, but it's just not a natural or often productive exercise. We consider balance and theme together at the start, then we prototype the ability, then we consider balance more highly at the end. For example, we are gonna let Persephone avoid death and it needs some constraints, so we designed it to be limited by her passive as well as having built-in nerfs attached to her. These were then scaled up to weaken her further after playtesting and live gameplay. I cannot stress how important theme is to design like this. Literally no one in the games industry works 100% off mechanics and then forces art onto it. That type of process just doesn't yield engaging content. And I can see the argument that Ajax makes here, by the way. You could make a very basic character with a line attack, a cone attack, a leap, and an ultimate that does high damage or something, with very plain values, and that would be a very balanced character, really, like you're very easy to adjust and balance them, but probably also a very, very uninteresting character. So you want to have some mechanics, something that matches the god as well, because we have quite a few people that are interested in the lore behind the gods and everything, and then build off of that. So theme has to be a factor. How exactly you weigh them against each other is maybe more open for discussion. And the last point Chaos brings up is that the statements about PTS are a bit worrisome. If PTS data is so unreliable, why have a PTS at all? In previous years, it was actually used to give feedback and test out new things, so is it now basically just useless? Ajax responded, PTS is primarily for bug finding and fixing. This has always been the case. PTS has always had intensely low player count and very unreliable data. However, PTS is certainly still useful for player feedback. We have made balance changes based on PTS feedback nearly every patch this year, or taken that feedback and immediately started working into the next bonus balance or full update. This, by the way, I have seen, like some feedback that was brought up during PTS was then in the bonus balance update later on in one way or another. So it still has value at some point, just not necessarily immediately. Ajax then writes, I was making points in my bigger post that PTS is generally not great data for anything, and also generally not great feedback for new gods, when it's such a small sample size and almost every comment reads like a different form of new god OP, and we see new god OP even on the weak gods. There just isn't a lot of action to take that quickly. I don't know why they see that all the time, by the way. I know that for certain gods, feedback has most certainly not been that, but I don't know. I guess it depends on who you ask as well. And an edit at the end. Oh yeah, about PTS being shorter. When PTS ran longer, those extra days had even lower players and basically did nothing except slow down our internal process. I don't think we have seen any less feedback or less bug reporting since shortening it, and we are much more efficient on our workdays. This part is unfortunate for us content creators, especially since it means we have to rush everything more in a single weekend, which is not always ideal, but that's just what it is. I mean, you work around it. Overall, I thought this was a very interesting post, and if you want to get updated for future ones like this, feel free to sub button and maybe the bell, so you get a notification when I talk about any SMITE news, especially Season 8 stuff as well. Other than that, thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you for the next one soon. ZiSotto, out.